First nights are very exciting. They don't always produce the best performances, rarely do in fact, but they are special whether you're a performer or a member of the audience. In January 1985, I was in Los Angeles to give the first performance of Tippett's Fourth Piano Sonata, which had been commissioned by the Los Angeles Philharmonic Association. It took place in the Japan-American Theatre. And as it happened, the connections between Japan and Los Angeles were very close that week, because the previous evening I was present at the first performance of Riverrun for piano and orchestra by the Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu. Well, what were my impressions, my first encounter with this piece? First of all, there was none of the effect of what you might call hardcore modernism, none of that striving for depth or for monumentality. There were no anxiety-ridden pages, nor any of modernism's often impenetrable complexity. There was just this beautiful surface and texture. The piece's central preoccupation seemed to be chords, alone or in streams, absolutely sumptuously orchestrated with the most luminous blendings of instruments. And the piece, rather than developing or progressing towards some goal, dividing into movements, it would suddenly, and by some mysterious alchemy, find itself in a new enchanted region. And later, when I got the score, I saw that these regions were actually marked out. These letters, A, B, C, and so on, which in orchestral scores are usually rehearsal cues, are used by Takemitsu to denote what are, in effect, separate pieces. As it happens, in Riverrun, they go from A to Z. And for me, Riverrun is an A to Z pleasure. You'd hardly deny that Riverrun is seductive and beguiling, but for the pleasure it gives to work, it has to be convincing. So, what convinces? What guarantees the pleasure? In 1982, Takemitsu wrote a short piano piece called Rain Tree Sketch, and in a novel by one of the composer's favourite writers, and apparently inspired by this piece by Takemitsu, is this passage. It has been named the Rain Tree because its abundant foliage continues to let fall raindrops collected from last night's shower until well after the following midday. Its hundreds of thousands of tiny finger-like leaves store up moisture while other trees dry up at once. What an ingenious tree. an ingenious tree. And that natural ingenuity is what Takemitsu is after in his music. Musical materials that appear to evolve freely of their own accord and that have all the spontaneity of an event in nature. He sees his job as a composer as someone who organises sounds according to their own natures. Perhaps the greatest influence on his music, by his own admission, is that of the Zen stone gardens of Japan. There's a passage in The Way of Zen by Alan Watts about the Zen stone gardens. He says, the intention of the best Japanese gardens is simply to suggest the general atmosphere of mountain and water, so arranging the design that it seems to have been helped rather than governed by the hand of man. The Zen gardener has no mind to impose his own intention upon natural forms, but is careful to follow the intentionless intention of the forms themselves, even though this involves the utmost care and skill. Now that intentionless intention, the concealing of art by art, the idea of the composer as one who facilitates rather than laying down laws, the absence of any governing system or theory to intimidate us or keep us out, that is the first of our guarantees of pleasure. Riverrun is the first word of Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, and one of 3 titles that he's taken from the novel. Though he confesses he cannot read Finnegan's Wake, he finds single words or phrases from the book extremely evocative. And of all the composers I know, Takemitsu is unusual in that he chooses a title well in advance of the composition of a piece. In fact, he says that the title is one of the primary sources of inspiration for the work, and that once he's got a title, half the piece is already written. It's quite apparent that Takemitsu is obsessed with natural phenomena. Rain, water, waves, rivers, oceans, trees, flowers, grass, gardens, sky, landscapes, islands, the seasons. But for Takemitsu, like many Japanese artists, this is part of an artistic creed. For him, sound too is nature. And the sounds and sights of nature are not just outside us, but also within us. He doesn't make distinctions between art, nature, and the world of human affairs. And so his dream merges the spontaneity of nature within one individual, himself, who has mastered the highest degree of technical perfection. Takemitsu acknowledges that the word riverrun is a beautiful word in itself, although a coined or fabricated one, and that it's concerned with water and the flow of water, and with all the features of nature that are rivers with their different currents, undercurrents, temperatures, vibrations, time values, and their eventual confluence with the ocean. But he finds a deeper suggestiveness in his title. For him, riverrun is a metaphor for life, life in all its richness and variety. It's not surprising that he should regard Debussy as his first musical teacher.
I have studied a lot from his music, especially his sense of color. But he never emphasized single things. I must say, especially his orchestra, for example, Image.
Yes.
He put just like a palm focus. Many things happen simultaneously, and to to blend beautiful things. Yes, this is the most important thing I have studied from his music. And his orchestration should belong to his essence of his music. Yes.
But what other guarantees of pleasure are there in the journey we take with Takemitsu into and through the dream world of Riverrun? Though it's written for piano and orchestra, the piece is not a piano concerto in the accepted sense. There's none of the method or rules of the traditional concerto form, and no sense of a soloist set against or attempting to master an orchestra, but the business of anything you can do, I can do better. Here, all is conciliation and the avoidance of contention and confrontation. The piece is a series of landscapes, always very inviting landscapes, through which the soloist and orchestra move, with the pianist acting as a kind of medium, with the ability and insight to interpret the landscapes.
Even such a short piece, but many are different scenery.
Yes.
And you are walking through into this scenery, many. And I put the scenery like a garden, maybe scroll paintings.
Yes.
Different sceneries juxtaposed.
Yes.
Juxtaposed
Yes.
scenery. And soloist should make some sense. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know the words. I'm sorry.
Yes, should make some sense out of the landscape.
Oh, it's you.
But the landscape,
it's beautiful.
The landscape is always welcoming wherever the piano goes. It's not like a 19th century concerto where the piano is against the orchestra or the piano is trying to do something better than the orchestra. It finds itself in a new landscape and is welcomed.
Soloist like a medium. Medium?
Yes.
Spiritual medium.
Yes.
Sometimes I walk with orchestra. There are some difficulties. Sometimes orchestra getting be like a monster.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
At that times I need some person. I mean, very specific person as medium.
Yeah.
So who should know my music and who has beautiful, I mean, vision.
Yes.
To give to the orchestra.
Yeah. Just listen to those chords and that orchestration. For me, that has to be a real guarantee of pleasure. But it's outrageous. How can he get away with it? You couldn't imagine chords more sexy than those. It's real X certificate stuff, and you have to get them right. And that orchestration, to my mind, is second to none. There's always been a suspicion that a composer like Debussy, a master of orchestration, is only a designer of fabulous decors, beguiling backdrops to nothing. So if you're a Takemitsu, is there not an even greater suspicion? Is he simply stunning us, stifling us with an overload of beauty? In Takemitsu's dream world, there's a fundamental reason why he's able to get away with this. In recent times, Western music and art has been a kind of utopia for the Japanese artist. Takemitsu knew the utopia of Western music before he knew Japanese music, and at a time when he hated Japan and all things Japanese. So in a sense, he was distanced from both cultures. He didn't feel he belonged to either culture, and so he was able to build works out of the two cultures without inhibition. He's not constrained by any of the do's and don'ts of what for him is an exotic culture in the West. He's a visitor to Western music, who does not share its conventions and codes, but who is free to relish the style or styles of what he finds there. Takemitsu's absorption of influences from the West is therefore uncluttered by all the accumulations of sentiment, memory, and tradition, and such a style, purged of all these references, can be described as pure. Forbidden fruit for Takemitsu. During the Second World War, when he was in his teens, such music, apart from some German music, was banned in Japan. So musical instincts were repressed. But after the war, an American radio station in Japan did broadcast all kinds of music, classical, big band, jazz music, and so that Takemitsu, who was a largely self-taught composer, found himself at the start of his career avidly absorbing a large number of disparate influences, including the music of his own culture, as well as jazz, and the works of many of the most potent 20th century Western composers, and most significantly as influences on his own language, Debussy and Messiaen. As far as the tradition of Western music is concerned, he says he found himself swimming upstream from the 20th century back to Bach. And it's interesting that now, as a preparation for composition and as a kind of purification rite, Takemitsu will listen to the whole of Bach's St. Matthew Passion.
When I light piece,
Yes.
always before the lighting piece,
Yes.
I play St. Matthew's Passion, whole piece.
Yes.
This is my ceremony to light music.
Your initiation ceremony.
Initiation
Yes.
ceremony.
Your rite of entry. Why? Why? Because this is something perfect in music, or what? Why the St. Matthew Passion?
I have not specific religion,
No.
but I am very religious people, and when I listen to St. Matthew's Passion, it cleans me up. I believe the music is a form of prayer.
It's also significant that the principal musical idea of riverrun is a melodic cell suggested by the very opening of Mozart's 40th Symphony. This musical idea and its provenance in Mozart can be interpreted as a symbol or the dream of that idealized society, that utopia, that perfect world towards which Takemitsu is striving. perfection and perfectibility must be seen as quintessential to Takemitsu's art, as to any Japanese artist's craft. The Japanese idea of role perfecting leads the individual to strive for perfection, the philosophy being that as individuals strive to attain perfectibility, then society, which is the creation of individuals, is also perfectible, so that Takemitsu, in striving for musical perfection, seeks to create in his sound world not only the right sounds, but always better ones. His dream world, however enticing and alluring, is not an escape from reality, not an invitation to lie back and surrender, like the hedonistic land of Tennyson's Lotus Eaters. It's a model for the real world.
My music, mostly my music, has no significant rhythmic construction, but when I write music, always I am very strongly concerned about the time, the concept of time.
Takemitsu has said, and these are his words, that composition is to give a proper meaning to the streams of sounds which penetrate the world. And so he submits to the arbitrariness of movement as perceived in the natural world, and also to the passage of time not necessarily constrained by the orthodoxies imposed on composition by rhythmic structure or by patterns which underline the way sound moves in time. In striving to give this proper meaning to the natural streams of sound, Takemitsu appears to float through the natural world, absorbing its movement and the passage of its time according to how he perceives them. He's an artist of the floating world. The idea of Takemitsu as an artist of the floating world shouldn't mislead us into thinking that our voyage with him through the waters of sound will be a formless or haphazard affair. Quite the contrary. The compositional technique, as we've seen, is to take ideas and repeat them in ever new formulations, each time working out a fresh viewpoint, so that the idea radiates in all directions. So, though he's trying to create a feeling of great freedom, that intentionless intention or the sensation of floating, his method is extraordinarily precise, whether in developing that Mozartian melodic cell, or in devising and colouring the rich harmonic language, or in controlling tempo and meter. Riverrun is made up of 165 bars of music, and in no fewer than 95 of them there are notated changes of tempo or speed. In 94 of them there are different meters or numbers of beats to the bar. But the art that all this compositional art is concealing is the creation of a feeling of spontaneity, a sense of passing through a heady sequence of totally new environments, cruising. Writing of the search for sexual encounter, the French writer Roland Barthes defines cruising as the voyage of desire, the surprise of the first time, as if the meeting possesses an unheard-of privilege, that of being withdrawn from all repetition, stereotype, or the same old thing. Cruising is anti-repetition. It's an act that repeats itself, but its catch is absolutely fresh. It's not inappropriate to use sexual imagery when discussing Takemitsu's music, because in expressing his distaste for the cerebral, the intellectualized music of the 50s and the 60s, the composer says,
this is music went so intellectual.
Yes.
And sometimes, of course, should be intellectual.
Yes.
But at the same time, music should be sensual.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Sometimes new contemporary music has no leg, just some.
Yes.
And sometimes music happens just on the paper. I believe the music, artistic music should be intellectual, but at the same time should be very erotic, sensual. We need the sensuality of music. Oh, I really love to be a composer, the most sexiest composer.
You are. You are.
No, from now.
Another effective image for Takemitsu's compositional method is found in the traditional Japanese style of painting known as emaki, or scroll painting, in which a series of painted scenes are juxtaposed on a frieze, so that composition is by addition and juxtaposition rather than by construction. And synthesis in such works of art is replaced by the swiftness and naturalness of the transitions to new pleasures. So similarly in Riverrun, the piano and orchestra are involved in a series of juxtaposed scenes, with the piano, as we've seen, as the agent of transition. In both scroll painting and in Riverrun, the satisfaction is derived from the variety and the interconnection of the pleasures afforded by the scenes. Well, whether we use the pictorial equivalent of scroll painting, or whether we borrow the sexual metaphor of cruising, or whether we adopt the equally appropriate image of the Zen garden, through which composer and listener pass, encountering at every turn a new delight, there can be no doubt when listening to Takemitsu's music that we're being taken on a voyage of desire. Desire which, if we yield or submit, will itself yield readily and abundantly the pleasures to be found en route. As we've seen, the pleasure resides in an erotic mixture of sound and sound language, and also in a compositional method which creates the sense both of great freedom of movement, the sensation of floating, and of apparently spontaneous first-time encounters. There is, as in the Zen garden, no governing system. There are no restraints of design. There's no discernible meaning or direction, so that nothing appears to compel the music to progress, to develop, or even to end. Takemitsu circumvents the sense of an ending, even of an entity. Nothing dominates anything else, but rather the constituents combine, mesh, alternate, revolve. Like all rivers, if you want to travel on it, you have to submit to it. In Riverrun, we experience the freedom, the free flow, the drift of the water, beautiful for all or no one to see, to no end. As Takemitsu says, at the end of a performance, it should not seem that a musical composition has come to an end. After all, which is more fun, an excursion that has been planned meticulously, or one taken on the spur of the moment?